Yeah, if you want to flip on to the next thing, yeah, so we're going to look at some ideas with actually using sound rather than these kind of rather nondescript sources. So the sounds, obviously, it's a massive spectrum of things that you might want to do here. I mean, I kind of got into this, I guess, just as I was walking around with my phone and kind of thought, that sounds interesting, started recording it, and I just began just having this collection of noises and sounds that I found. And it kind of ranged from everyday household objects, you know, using a chainsaw to, you know, birds chirping on the garden, that sort of thing. And I guess that just really kind of stimulated some ideas for me to start working with incorporating sound into a soundscape with the idea of it having some kind of musical structure as well, I suppose. What we're talking here is basically using samples, and I know there's a whole genre of kind of sampling and kind of, you know, electronic music that uses samples as its starting point. You can go and download endless samples and all sorts of stuff. But this is really going away from that idea, and again, not necessarily working with sound in a way that has that kind of formal structure to it, but just kind of like just delighting in the qualities of what you can find within a sound and what you can do with it. If you want to just flip along, so yeah, you might want to use sound to tell a story. So you know, maybe you're developing a piece of music and you want to kind of set a scene, or maybe there's some kind of melody or even words that are kind of starting to go a particular direction. You might want to incorporate some sounds into that as kind of part of that journey that you want the listener to go on. That's kind of quite a natural thing to want to do, is kind of gives it a context. But then you also might want to take that sound and kind of morph it a little bit and kind of do something extra to it, and start playing with the sound itself. So, you know, again, within the context of a soundscape, it may be that you want to start out with the natural sound that's there, but then start to work with that and take it in a different direction, and do something more interesting with it. So, you know, the most obvious thing that you can do there is kind of stretching it, reversing it, chopping it up into smaller parts, really sampling those things over again and doing that again. You know, you could spend, you know, a lifetime just doing that sort of stuff, and there are, you know, plenty of people out there that have kind of like forged careers on playing with that sort of stuff. Another way of using sound is, again, like we did with the noise, is to incorporate sound back into another instrument. So as you're playing that instrument, you're also playing that sound simultaneously with the sound of the instrument itself. You can also use sound, again, part of a drum kit idea, and create very unique percussion type ideas. Granular synthesis is another kind of toolkit that you've got, which basically breaks sound down into lots of little micro elements, and you can use those micro elements to do a whole range of different things as well. For me, I kind of like the layers idea, where you may be doing several of these things at once. You're not necessarily just doing one thing, but you're doing several things, and kind of blending them, or even bleeding from one starting point into another. This idea of kind of like moving through things. And then I threw on the end there another kind of starting point, which is so that I'm not particularly working with directly, but I'm kind of aware of, and what, you know, Liam's been doing there is this idea of you know, scratching or creating tape effects from a sound that you're working with, and that can be quite a physical way of working, as we've got with the dials, or kind of just simply pulling tape around what it can do. And you can do that with software as well as with the physical stuff. There are software tools that will simulate those kinds of ideas. Okay, you know, move it on. So this is where are we at with this one? Okay, so this is the idea of using sound as a where are we? Sorry, go back to there. Yeah, so this is the idea of using sound and using it as an instrument, basically. So this is brought sample into a software device. This could be on Ableton again, or it could be in any other DAW, and you're using your key. Have I got any sound here?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of, as you're playing the notes of your instrument, you're introducing that sound playing over the top of some other instruments. So in this particular instance, I'm not using any other oscillators or kind of musical notes. It's just simply the sound itself being processed through different pitch levels, effectively. So he's just shifting the pitch around and to see what sort of sound you can get from it. Again, you've got filters you can play with within that space to see what else it can do. Just see if I've got another one on there that's similar to it. Yeah, so hopefully this is going to sound slightly different. So all I've done here is kind of taken the same sound sample and just kind of shifted it around and worked the idea. So for instance, flip on another slide. So this is the same sound sample, exactly the same sound sample, but this time it's being used in the idea of a kind of a drum kit. So I've created four different sounds that can be played as a drum kit, effectively. So this is kind of a bit of a basic kind of note. Where are we? More echoey. I don't know if you need to give it a name, but it's a noise. That's definitely towards the end of kind of a little bit of a hi-hat sort of sound. So you can kind of imagine these things all feeding into, a larger piece, and so you've got some of those more pitch-related sounds, you've got more of the percussive type sounds, and then you've maybe got longer, undulating kind of sort of this idea of an atonal morphing kind of a drone type sound that you can kind of create. So I'm going to flip on to another one now. So this is again going back to Ableton. I can't actually play this one for you because I don't have the setup for it, but essentially if you go to instrument rack in Ableton, and I imagine that other DAWs have got a similar kind of tool, you can drop a sample into that instrument rack alongside other instruments, so that as you're playing your MIDI, whatever it is that's feeding into that, you're effectively again giving a little bit of pitch to that sound. So it could be something like that first sound we saw with her, but it's being sampled alongside a little bit of other synth sounds as well, kind of creating more useful texture. Just flip it on one more. This one gets us more into the idea of granular. I'll see if I can bring this one up actually. Let's see if I've got this one handy. Where did I put that? Can't remember what I saved this one as now. That's ridiculous.
Can I just ask quickly, Taylor, what's the best granular synthesis plugin that you've encountered?
Right, so on an iPad, or
In general.
in other things?
In general, yeah, because I've tried a few and
Yeah.
some of them are alright, but you know.
Yeah, they can be a bit opaque, I guess, can't they? Is the challenge. So I think I don't know. I'm not sure whether I've got what I would say was the best. I mean, obviously within Ableton you've got some granular kind of things that you can work with that are quite useful. This one, it's called Quanta.
I thought this one looked quite good actually.
Yeah, this is an iPad based on. Just see if I can bring this one up. Just bear with me a second. What was that to save this one as? Must have done it as something. No, it's not. It's quite nice.
Very cinematic.
Here we go. Yeah, okay, so what you've got is these little blue dots represent the grains. The blue vertical line represents where those grains are starting from. So effectively, the grains are moving. So when you're playing notes, you've got those grains moving around on through the file. So it's exactly the same sample that I was using in the other two demonstrations. So it's and you can have as many grains as you want. This is limited at the moment, but it can be many more. And basically, yeah, you can use filters to kind of like control what those ultimately sound like. Yeah, it's interesting.
What is a green when you say a green?
What is
a green? Like, and how does it affect this?
what?
Like a green.
It's
When
like
you
a
say
really small
grain.
part of the wavelength, so visually
so-
it's like taking very
so
small
if
parts.
you, so if you can imagine the sample being divided up into 1,000 grains.
As in a timeline.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So it's just taking that little bit of it.
Got it.
So initially it's only going to play that little bit, but then if you add some movement to it, it will then start to move through the sample, if you like. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you
I'm slowly getting that.
so the grain itself is quite small. The sample is quite small, and all you're doing is saying like, all right, okay, you can either do random movement, or you can say move left to right, or you can determine how much speed there is, in terms of and how long it's going to play from the sample. So it just depends really what you want to try and do with that. So on this one, if I take the length down, they're not really moving very much. So yeah, it's kind of quite interesting how that works. If you take the length up, you get more of a flow of what's going on with the sound. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you can kind of randomise that so that sometimes you're getting more length than others when you're kind of playing that through. So if you want to get again more layers and textures, then that's the way to do that.
It's a good tool for either making very long sounds very short and bitty, or
Yeah.
making very small sounds massive. Like really big textures.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of describing it. I like that. Okay, one more. Let's see where we go to next. So simply, this is just kind of showing that. I'll try and get a video of this and put it up into the chat. So basically, I've got 3 different instruments there, but they're all being controlled just by this MK Mini, essentially. So that becomes quite interesting in the sense that, you know, as well as putting layers within your instruments, so you've got sounds within layers within your instruments, you've then got instruments coming alongside each other as well, all being controlled from one starting point. And obviously you've got, you know, you've got maybe some bass notes that you want to work with, you've got some higher notes that you want to work with, and play around with some of those things and use some of the filter controls on here to kind of work with that. So it's just sort of showing you in a live kind of idea that you can actually get quite a lot of content, if you like, being worked with simultaneously just by some you know, simple key presses on the keyboard. I think that's where that becomes quite interesting. And this one introduces the idea of a wavetable there in the centre, which is different from granular synthesis, because what a wavetable is doing is taking the sound and playing your either oscillator from your synthesizer or your sample sound, and it's playing it through a structure of a wave that is then controlling what it might be, the filter it's controlling, or the pitch that it's controlling, or various other things. And what the idea of a wavetable is, you can move up and down within that wave structure to get different kind of patterns of movement happening within the sound that you're working with, and that can be quite quick changes. It can be happening, you know, over just, you know, a second, where you've got that wave movement going through, or it could be again a long, slow, ponderous kind of like drone type sound that you're working with. Let's just move on one more. So I was going to jump back into some modular stuff very quickly, and this is going to kind of take us to the generative kind of thing. So how are we doing for time?
We've got, well, it's 31 minutes past. If it's okay to do some playing
I was
about
thinking
quarter to.
maybe we should do that. That's what I was thinking. We could stop now and do a little bit of playing, and then just come back to
Okay.
some of this. That's what we want to do.
Yeah. Bravo. Well done, everyone.
Yeah.
Excellent jams.
Yeah. See your subways at the end there. That was great.
Yeah.
You could just feel the walls kind of.
It's a nice kind of falling off the ramp kind of thing, didn't it? You know, like when there was the who was giving us the kind of synth chords, the kind of was it you two? Yeah, because there was the kind of the kind of harmonic soup, and actually like when it kind of like there was maybe it wasn't that, but there was something that was kind of consistent the whole way, and then like when that kind of went out,
there was
kind of faded out, and maybe a bit of
it
noise.
was one of the granular things I was using. Probably could well have been that.
Yeah.
I was playing a sort of, there was like a note sequence I was kind of playing by hand and then adding to it, and then I can either play it by hand or I can set it to play as a sequence. And so I started playing it as a sequence, and then at one point I just I ramped the speed of the sequence like right up, so it was like you couldn't hear it as a sequence of notes. It was just like it was like noise at that point.
Oh wow.
And then that was maybe, I don't know if that's what you're describing as like the falling off.
Maybe, yeah. But there was it was effective at kind of signalling that it was time to wrap up. Actually, when it kind of like because it was like the middle or the bottom kind of just stopped.
Right.
We still had this nice decay,
Uh-huh.
and everyone just kind of followed that and very nicely kind of.
I didn't think
yeah.
open chords going that slowly brought out the foot, but could be that.
Could be.
I think
Maybe it was a combination
all
of
of
it.
it.
Yeah. Telepathic.
How are we doing? So I'll speak to this bit quickly.
10 minutes left.
Okay.
Happy
People
to
want
do
to
it,
just
or-
cover a little bit modular. So loads of modules that you can get. It's a tiny fraction. They all look a little bit intimidating to begin with, but basically there are a lot of commonalities between them. Once you've worked out what is an input and what is an output, what is something that can modulate, they start to make more sense. So I just want to jump on a slide. So this is a very, very simple. The previous ones had no input. Now we're starting to put some input into it. So this is what I was playing with just during the session. Actually, it's just no frills. It's just an oscillator. And it's just there. So I mean, that it doesn't do anything other than oscillate. Obviously you can change kind of like different types of tones depending on what you want to. Whether you want saw waves or triangle waves or pulses and things like that. So you can get a little bit of movement in just by playing around with some of those things, but essentially it's an oscillation. That's all it is. Okay, move on. So this one is I guess just a little bit more sophisticated. So here we've still got that basic oscillator. Second one in, we've got a clock. We've got an envelope which is attack, decay, sustain, release. It's just in a different visual type. We've got a volume control. We've got a filter, and we've got music going, the sound going out at the other end of it. On its own, again, you've just got the clock is determining the pulse of the sound. And all I'm doing here is just sweeping through that oscillator, just playing around with different kind of controls. Obviously, if we change the beat, just going to mess around with that, and again we can mess around with the filter a little bit. But the filter's kind of depending on got more independent filter, depends on what your original source is. Jump on to the next slide quickly. All we've done here is we've added a little sequencer into the mix. So we've got an output from a sequencer. So now we're kind of automating it a little bit. Instead of trying to control the sound by hand or using some sort of MIDI keyboard, we're using a little sequencer to kind of drive that. And we've got some reverb towards the right hand side, which is giving a little bit of quality to it. So that's that one. Jump on again. So from here, we can now start to think about generative stuff. And once we've started having sequences going in, and LFOs that are controlling different elements of the sound, we can start to think about how a generative pattern might emerge, and that's something that can kind of play out on its own, or you can still use generative within a structured sound by kind of using that as, if you like, the kicking off point for other melodies that you want to play, which is kind of how I tend to work most of the time. I might have 2 or 3 generative inputs and kind of modulate between them and use those to kick off ideas in my head of how I then want to make improvised sound on top of that, if you like. So the advantage of the generative is it's kind of opens up more possibilities, got a little bit of randomness. Downside of it is it can be a bit unexpected. There might be a shift of rhythm that you weren't anticipating happening. You've got to deal with it. There are lots of dedicated apps that will do a lot of this work for you. You don't have to use a modular toolkit for this. You can kind of create generative stuff directly in Ableton using Max for Live, and all sorts of other apps will go into that. Just jump ahead one more. So that's starting again to look at what's going on here. It might be easier if I can show you rather than talk about it from over here. Alright, so we're using this to create a pulse. The pulse is going into here, and there's an output going there. This is something called sample and hold. Sample and hold is basically it's kind of a random generator. So what it does is it's listening out for signals, and whenever the trigger happens, it says stop. So wherever that point is on the signal path, it says stop, and I'll pass that signal on to the next bit in the chain. So every time this sends a pulse to here, it's sending out a random signal at this end, if you like. So all this is doing is controlling how often it happens, and then the sample and hold is sending a random input into there. That is then being processed by something called an attenuator. And what that is doing is because it's a random signal, you don't know where that's going to appear on the frequency spectrum. So you might want to sort of say, well, actually, let's at least have it within this field. So what this attenuator is doing is saying, let's constrain those signals so that at least they're within these parameters. So you've kind of got a kind of pitch and range. Yes.
Yeah, that was going to be a question. Random in as in pitch, is that the signal?
So you kind of set it. It's not an exact science. But you kind of say, I don't want anything more than this in my pitch, and I don't want anything too much lower than this in the pitch,
right.
and I want that to happen within I don't know, this 2 octaves or something like that. So you kind of like sort of saying how wide is the range, and which octave is your starting point, if you like.
It's only really pitched because it's being patched to the volt per octave.
Yeah, so eventually that gets to here, and that is where your sound is going to come out, and the pitch is being sent in through here.
It's being quantized.
Yeah, it's also being quantized in this one.
Like how does it? Why is it outputting? Equal temperament notes. But that machine's doing it.
The quantizer is doing that for you. So I think that's a B scale.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can decide what scale you want, or you can just put in a few random notes, whatever you want to do. You can use other. So you could use another LFO to change that. So you could change it over time, transpose it, etc. You could toggle it through the system, so it might reverse those around. So that over time you're getting a slightly different set of notes. So that's where it becomes generative, because you kind of say, okay, here's a set pattern, but let's not use that set pattern all the time. Let's trigger different variations of that pattern to come out the other end. Just jump on one more. So then you get into something more complicated like this. So if we've got time, we could play that and see what it sounds like. Again, I'll put this up onto. Make sure I get the right one here. Is that one there? Yes, is that one there? No. self-generating this kind of random little walk across the spectrum and using that to kind of drive an oscillator. So again, what can I point out? One we talked about already. So we've got a sample and hold here. That's driving. One of the things that's driving is some random time factors on the delay. So it's changing the delay parameters over time. So you'll get shifts in the patterning of how the delay happens. What else have we got going on? Or what else can we talk about? Some of the things you can recognise quite simply. So this is a triple LFO. So it's like having that single LFO that we saw in the previous diagram, where you've got three of them together. So you can kind of it's just for compactness, really, essentially. It's just a simplified version of those. So these are driving various elements of, so it's driving some frequency modulation on here. This one's driving the velocity. The sound output. What else have we got being driven? Playing around with that. What else can we talk about? Another LFO here. That's triggering this gate for the randomness. And then we've got various patterns that are being driven on here as well. So you've got a kind of a pattern that's going on there. And that pattern can be reversed and changed, the pitch changed. That's great. Play your own way.
Thanks very much. Does anyone have any? We're kind of at time now, but
Yeah.
we do maybe a couple of questions if anyone's got any.
So, well, I was going to ask a question as well. Is if there's anything here that people want me to go into in some more depth on another session, then that's kind of really principle what I was doing here was kind of raise several different ideas that could be taken off a bit further if you wanted them to.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Any takers for the questions or?
I guess one. So are you doing this all from your iPad?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
Oh, alright, cool. I don't know if that's possible. I don't have a GarageBand on my iPad, but I've got a Moog for free on it at one point.
Yeah.
But apart from that, so is this a free app you said? A VC Rack or VCV? Sorry.
A VCV rack is free on a PC and Mac.
Oh, okay.
But then there are some paid options and paid models you can
I
get.
think
But it's basically
dabbled on PC.
MI rack was something you had to pay for. It wasn't a lot.
Okay, got it.
But I mean, when you say iPad apps, they're pretty cheap, really.
Yeah.
Cool.
But as I was just explaining to Liam, Apple are changing some of the constraints on developers that are producing some of these apps, and quite a lot of the guys that are producing these apps are pretty kind of small scale.
Oh, there you go.
I think